And look at him swatting at the air.
I know. These little Bill Gates malaria bore fucking mosquitoes with little nanobots in them.
Broadcasting live from a Chinese-made microphone high atop Sioux Nation. Here with Clemens, we have special guest Brad Olsen live with us on tonight's show. Brad, thanks for squeezing us in your busy schedule. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, nice to be on Phantom Facts and talk to you about a lot of phantomy facts all around the world.
Well, you were the one when we talked to you last. I had no clue about any of this Antarctica stuff. The whole thing that started this whole, we'll talk about that previous episode. But yeah, the discussion of Admiral Byrd. And so we did an episode, I don't know, was it a month ago, Anti-Heiser? Yeah. About Admiral Byrd. And I found up some old videos from him where he was interviewed on a CBS, interview of the 15 minutes.
With the watchmaker.
Yes.
Shameless what's really interesting about that particular interview? It was after Operation High Jump, and he described going, quote, beyond the poles. Well, how do you go beyond the poles unless he was going into inner Earth? And that is the premise of my research and an upcoming new book about Admiral Byrd's secret diary about him going into inner Earth and writing about it. And his son published the book after his death. Now
I am not well versed in how to do efficient research. So it's just, my 20 minutes of looking for, I was looking for which son not wrote it, but kept it hidden and then exposed it. Was it the one that died? They found he looked like he was homeless, but he was to give a speech about his father, and then they found him in a warehouse area in New Jersey.
Gosh, I didn't hear that story. That's a shame. And I wasn't aware he had more than one son. I saw some interviews with the son who did publish a book. I just can't recall his name.
So what I had found was his son was with him. He was 20. He would have been 27, I think, at the time of Operation High Jump.
He took his son with?
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And so to me, that's what seemed like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, because you're more versed on that stuff,
I'm learning like you guys are. This is good information for me.
Well, so you think the secret diary is genuine? You have no doubt.
Well, there's really no way to be sure. I'm hoping that there will be an opportunity to check it for his handwriting, do a handwriting test. That is a pretty accurate way of doing it. I don't believe it's been released to do that. So what am I going off of then to say that this could be a reality? First of all, one very big inconsistency in the book, in the diary that is, he continually refers to going into this inner Earth realm in the Arctic region, not the Antarctic region. So this would be, this would have been published and written after Operation High Jump. Although the flight logs and the dates of his entries are absolutely during the period of Operation High Jump. So that's kind of a little twist to the story, because we all know he was down there in the Antarctic winter in late 1946, 1947. He made the quote with El Mercurio newspaper in Chile coming back up after the Battle of High Jump, in which he said, "We will be faced with an enemy that can fly pole to pole at incredible speeds." Then when he got back to the U.S., he was instantly debriefed, and the diary goes into this, how they really mistreated him. He's a decorated hero, a ticker tape parade type admiral. But as soon as he got back, he was given the riot act and put into interrogation, even having to be checked out by medical staff. So he went into a version of quarantine. He was very taken back by how they treated him. That is the U.S. military when he got back to the Pentagon. Well, and he was ordered for the rest of his life never to talk about it. But he did put in little veiled messaging, like in that interview for the Watchmaker, that he went beyond the poles, which I take as a reference to his experience there.
I got a clip of it all primed and ready. Just want to
go ahead and play it
on it.
And keep in mind too, like he's the youngest admiral, like in the Navy too, the youngest man to achieve admiral. So a very credible person.
According to their standards, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, but I don't think it will be for long, because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
Talking about Antarctica here, and they're asking him about, will there be more explorations to Antarctica? And then they ask him this question, which I thought
was interesting. Are private expeditions a thing of the past? Is expedition and exploration, making expedition and exploration now purely a government function because of the tremendous cost?
Isn't that an interesting question to ask in only like a 15-minute interview?
Yeah.
It's odd. Like, why out of all the questions you can ask this guy, you're going to be like, hey, is private exploration a thing of the past?
Exactly. And it was only just beginning, because there really was no Antarctica expedition in the late 1950s when this interview took place.
It's interesting, his response too. Like,
I don't think so. I think down south, it may be more or less a thing of the past, but not other expeditions.
But within just showing
down south, it might be a thing of the past. Wow, that was really interesting. So he was advocating for a restriction of travel down there.
I don't think he was advocating for it. I think he was just saying, like, maybe, and this is my opinion, like, he, maybe it was just through his experience of coming back and having to go through that whole ordeal with the government. He's like, the government's not going to let any private exploration happen down here. Like, that's just not, I mean, you can explore Brazil if you want, or Argentina, but down south, it's not going to happen.
Well, I was there 4.5 years ago. As you know, I took a sailboat across from the southern tip of South America, which is just off the map there, to the northern tip of the Palmer Peninsula, which you can see on the upper left-hand corner of that map. It took 92 hours to cross on a sailboat on the Drake Passage, one of the roughest seas of the world. And I've got a multitude of videos and photos from my trip. A lot of people who believe in the flat earth say, well, then where was I? Here's mountains. There's no such thing as an ice wall. I mean, here I am.
We're not talking flat earth, all right? Just don't try to sneak it in.
No, I don't want to either, but I'm just saying, in a way, that's the proof is, look, it's down there. And then a lot of, doesn't even have to be flat earthers, but people who think Antarctica is just in lockdown, I'm also here to say it's not, because I went down there. Yeah, it's pricey, but I talked to adventure travel companies that do private trips. If you got enough money, they'll fly you to Vincent Massif to climb the tallest mountain in Antarctica. They'll fly you to South Pole. If you want to go there, you got to fly around the no-fly zone, though. That is very much a reality.
Well, let's talk about the no-fly zone, because that's where the interest lies. Is
sure,
what Admiral Byrd. Now, from what I read in the journal, and when you read the journal, like, what stood out to you? As, do you think there's like a center Earth, or do you think there's other living spaces, or what the hell is over in Antarctica that spooked Admiral Byrd into submission?
Well, it wasn't that it spooked him. It spooked the Pentagon and the intelligence services that put a gag order on him for the rest of his life. That's why he could only speak of it in veiled terms, like going beyond the poles. because the diary itself is very short, by the way, even though it is formatted in a large size. Sometimes there's only a sentence or two on every spread. And then they have a lot of pictures of Admiral Byrd, some of Operation High Jump, some are just general images of Antarctica, of men with penguins, for example, but also some maps and things like that. So the diary is very short. If you condensed it to a regular sized book, it'd only be about 6-7 pages long. So it's easy to quote from. It's actually easy to memorize because he gives the dates and the time that he leaves Little America. And by the way, Admiral Byrd was also an expert aviator. That means pilot who did many firsts, including the very first pilot to go over the South Pole in 1929. So this is 18 years before Operation High Jump. And there's no way he would have flown a circle over the South Pole and not seen the hole. And the hole is at 89 degrees. So of course the pole is at 90 degrees south. The hole is probably 30 to 50 miles away from Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, which is the only base down there, but also has this massive no-fly zone right over that area that Brian S., the whistleblower to Linda Moulton Howe, described, defying the no-fly rule to get emergency evacuation back to the Davis base in the direct line through the no-fly. And that's when he saw the hole in the ice. And he gives some of the best and most interesting testimony of it, that it's several miles wide. There's even a road like that you could take a snowcat down into it. You could drive into the hole. They must have created a road going down in there. And it's the NSA, the No Such Agency, who never admitted their existence until the 1980s, but were created in the late 1940s by the Truman administration around the same time they created the CIA. But the NSA was tasked at dealing with all things extraterrestrial. And the NSA is down in Antarctica. They even have an unmarked building in the McMurdo complex of buildings, the largest base run by the Americans, largest base in Antarctica too. And nobody knows what the NSA is doing down there or what they're up to or why they need their own building. And they're constantly going back and forth to the South Pole. So that's another clue, another data point that what Admiral Byrd was writing about in his diary was his direct experience. And so what he saw was a verdant green valley, which shouldn't have been there. And he even said so in his diary. And then him and just a radio man in his plane lost control, they lost contact on their radio with Little America. And there are 3 hours of missing time on the other end, on the Little America side, as far as his trip. They thought he crashed. They thought, how are we going to get him? He's probably dead. And then 3 hours later, he came back on and said, everything's fine. We're flying back to base. But in those 3 hours, he then was flying over this verdant valley when two disc-shaped craft, he described as, called them flugerods, came wingtip to wingtip, and he lost control of the plane. And they came over the radio with a German accent and said, "Don't worry, Admiral, we'll be landing your plane very shortly." And they said, "Welcome to our domain." Then they landed the plane. Two men came out of their dish-shaped craft and walked over with German or Nordic accents. But he noticed that there were some swastikas on the flugelrods too. He was putting it together. Wow, we just defeated Nazi Germany a year and a half ago, and here I am, pretty much a captured soldier, although they did not treat him that way. They took him and the radio man into what he described as a shimmering, very ultra-modern, he called it Buck Rogers-like futuristic city. The radio man was ordered to stay behind, and Admiral Byrd was summoned to meet the master. And the master, who he thought was otherworldly and telepathic and very wise man, not alien-like, but more human-like than anything, was there to warn him about the U.S. recently detonating nuclear explosions at White Sands, New Mexico, and then, of course, on Nagasaki and Hiroshima only a year or so later, before Admiral Byrd got there. So the master was very concerned with the U.S. having nuclear bombs. They didn't even like the idea of nuclear energy or anything with it. So he's warning them, you got to take this back to your masters. He said, you're very well respected on the surface world. And when he said that, Admiral Byrd took back and said, surface world. And then the master said, yes, you are in the domain of the Aramani, this advanced civilization. He's described them as being many thousands of years in advance of our own, and was there just to issue this warning that Admiral Byrd was to go back and tell his superiors, we need to cancel all our nuclear programs, and we have to convince the Soviets to do the same, so there isn't an arm race. So he goes back, he flies back the way he came, and as the Germans were letting him have control of his plane back, they said, Auf Wiedersehen, goodbye in German. And so he flew back to Little America. Then he connected with the armada of ships for the Battle of High Jump just a few weeks later. And that's when America was routed in the Battle of High Jump, very one-sided affair. And Admiral Byrd was ordered and very naturally.
Because it was supposed to last like 18 months or.
Well, it was supposed to last 6 or 7 months, but he turned it around in 2 months, and they started heading back. And then that was when he made the comment to the journalist at the El Mercurio, only to be taken right into custody as soon as he landed. No ticker tape parade for Admiral Byrd. They got their ass handed to them. And that's why Operation High Jump is still a top secret operation.
So the Navy, Secretary of the Navy in 1947 gets admitted into an insane asylum what's the military? It was a military hospital.
Bethesda, James Forrestal.
Yes, and he commits suicide by the way
he was suicided.
The way Putin suicides people, like throws them off a balcony. You think that had correlation?
Yes. And the correlation is that the Roswell crash also happened in 1947, as well as the Kenneth Arnold sighting of UFO crafts just before Roswell in the summer of 1947. He was just a pilot flying in Washington State, saw a bunch of unidentified flying objects right over Mount Rainier, and that made national news. That was a big story. Then Roswell happens about a month or two later, and at first it was announced disc recovered on ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. Then the very next day, the whole story changed. Yeah, it was weather balloon, it was crash test dummies, it was all kinds of different changing stories, but it certainly wasn't anything alien anymore. And that's very curious, because all people who witnessed the craft, and the very first people that were out there, including Max Bressel, who owned the ranch, and his sons and other people, they saw alien bodies, and one of them was still alive. Here's actually funny. We should be talking about this because I have a representation, if I can get my big head out of the way, of the Roswell crash right there with the living alien. So that's approximately what they would have been coming in to see.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing about the Roswell crash is, for days, Max Bressel, the rancher, kept calling the air base at Roswell. This is before the Air Force was formed. The Army had the air base in Roswell. They didn't want to come out. They didn't want to deal with it. They blew him off. He kept calling and saying, look, this strange thing is not from our world. It's out here, and one of them's still alive. You guys got to come out here. We don't know what to do. Finally, they did, and that's what changed the story. But it had elapsed over so many days that by then the media had heard about this story too. And that's how they were able to report about it in the newspaper called the Daily Roswell Record. And that story got on the news wires and did actually appear in San Francisco Chronicle and other newspapers across the country as a news story. And then so Philip Corso, his book called The Day After Roswell, gets into the whole secret state of how they had to dismiss the whole notion of a crash craft with alien beings. But anybody in the intelligence service at the time knew that they had, including William Cooper, whose famous quote from the 1989 UFO Congress, he said, "There were more live aliens recovered than you have been aware of." And so the NSA was then tasked to do all these things: crash retrieval recovery, alien bodies or alien living, and invent a cover story if necessary to cover the tracks. And this has been going on for 75 years, you guys. I find it very interesting that now all of a sudden there's all these news stories about about UFOs. Lester Holt on NBC Nightly News about a month and a half ago comes on and says, the Pentagon says there's a big mothership in our solar system. Oh, really? How come this isn't the biggest news story in the history of news stories?
No, it's about the cocaine that was thrown over at the White House.
Stupid stuff.
It's about the biggest story in the world right now.
Right.
Well, so you mentioned the race of species that he encountered. I forget what. I don't remember the name. What was it, Brian?
In Antarctica?
Yeah.
Well, he called the master called his own civilization the Ariani.
The Ariani.
And their city was known as the Domain.
The Ariani. So now, what do we have any idea of what the Ariani look like?
Tall whites, hybrid with humans. He described the master as being extraordinarily wise and intelligent. I'm reading between the lines. He didn't use the word telepathic, but I'm thinking Admiral Byrd experienced that because he was given orders. He didn't say how, that he was to fly out alone with only his radio man because he just needed another pilot or another person to work the radio at that time. But he was summoned. How? I would also say telepathically. He just knew he had to go out there, and that was his experience with the master, just an ascended master, a very advanced being. But he didn't describe him as being that much different looking than humans. Perhaps taller, perhaps whiter skin, maybe larger eyes. So he was a little different, but not quite like a gray alien, for example, really out there different.
The Ariani, correct?
The master. And he probably saw some other people within the domain, but he only describes the two pilots with a German or Nordic accent and then meeting the master.
Well, keep in mind too, like this is still an admiral. So like, I don't know about you, but like there's not many admirals that take orders very well, right? So, I mean, I wasn't an officer myself in the military, but like, for him to, I don't know, I guess hearing that he was taking orders is kind of a serious thing for me because, he's basically top of the food chain. So it's got to be a pretty significant thing for him to come back and to start talking about loyalty and how, this is the first time that we're supposed to be down there, which is why they picked him in the first place. And for him to be like, well, there's probably not going to be a lot of personal exploration down there, but, yeah, there'll definitely be exploration.
Did you see that part in the interview, Brad?
Which part?
The loyalty part. It's the last question they ask him, and it's very eerie. Let me show it to you, just so a little refresher. I can't remember the exact time of it. It's like,
they reminded him, "You're a soldier and you take orders." But you're right; he's top admiral, highly decorated.
Yeah,
he was given his marching orders. He was basically read the riot act and told what to do. So that too is strange.
Let me see. I think this is
for those of the speakers. The editorial,
or is it?
Let's see how. And the guy's so smug about it. Can you guys see this?
I think they're just as right.
Well,
I can't.
What would you say was the most valuable factor on expedition? Is it morale, or physical courage, or is it sheer equipment?
Well, I've always thought that loyalty was by far the most important trait.
Loyalty.
The British told me.
Sheer equipment.
Well, I've always thought that loyalty was by far the most important trait.
I mean, that's just, there's no way that's, they've planned those questions, a couple weeks in advance, because they got to get them within like 2-minute answers, enough to ask them 4 questions.
Sure. Yeah, it's very much a planned answer,
So,
as TV was back then.
how did the Germans develop a friendship with this Ariani race? I mean, do we know? I mean, it's a little weird, right?
It's kind of hard to know anything here. So that's why, as a researcher, all I can do is collect the data points, read into what a lot of the other historical record shows, and a lot of it leads back to not only World War II, but pre-World War II, just after World War I, actually, at the hunting lodge in Bavaria near Berchtesgaden, southern Alps, in the Alps region, southern Germany. And that's where the Vril Society was meeting. And I just found out from some friends of mine who lived there, they actually found the hunting lodge. It's still there. It's all boarded up. I don't think there's a way to get back into it. But the Vril women had long hair. Name was Sigril and Maria Orsic and others, who are highly psychic, telepathic, and were making connections in the early 1920s with the Aldebaran star system. And they were so adept at their telepathic abilities that they were able to telepathically view and then translate pen on paper plans for 0-point energy, for anti-gravity craft, even free energy. The Aldebaran said that because Germany was so technologically adept, that they had chosen them for this mission. And just right after World War I, the Germans were a very peaceful society. This is the Roaring 20s, they're getting back into it, post-war era. But at the same time, there was the Thule Society, which had as its members Adolf Hitler and Hermann Hesse and Himmler and others who became top officials in the Third Reich. And they were on the occultic side, you could say, of the dark side, where the Vril women were on the light. And it wasn't very long until the Thule Society had co-opted all of these plans that the Vril women had started to download. And you could even make the argument that one of the reasons why the Third Reich and the German armed forces made such incredible advances so quickly was because they started to backward engineer this stuff. They started to work with it. They started to build prototypes. Some of those prototype UFOs were even called the Vril craft, spelled the same way. And they also described this, the ether, this energy force that pervades our planet and all through the universe, as Vril energy. And then they began developing a more warlike craft called the Hanibu, and that was flown as a prototype for the very first time in the waning months of the war on February 14th, 1945. And then all those crafts either flew out of there down to Antarctica or South America, where there are large bases that are owned by Germans, huge tracts of land that are basically micronations. Even to this day, they exist. And the Germans had all the money, so they could do these kind of things, as well as buying these fascist governments, or with the help of our CIA, toppling democratically elected governments and putting in fascists like Pinochet, or Perón was already the president of Argentina at the end of World War II. So they're shipping all the Nazis over there, all the loot, and all this high-tech equipment which by the time the Soviets got to the Skoda works in what is today the Czech Republic, there was nothing there. No technology there. Only the corpses of a few scientists who refused to take their next orders, and that is relocate to Antarctica. If they said no, if they said the war's over, I'm going to go home now, someone came up behind them and popped the cap in them, and there they lay dead by the time the Soviets arrived. So they found that very curious, that there was basically an order to evacuate to another far-flung colony, or you're dead.
I was saw this article here about UFO sightings in Germany, and there is a association of UFO research in Germany. Their data bank includes 140,000 entries. Of course,
Wow.
they just may 95% of them can be explained, but it is interesting. Like they talk about a YouTuber there that's his only focus, and just hundreds of thousands of followers. So it's a high topic of interest in Germany to this day, which we always think about the American side of it, like, Roswell and even what happened in Las Vegas a few weeks ago, which I'm pretty, I don't know if you saw that at all, Brad, about that green light.
Yeah, the landing in the backyard.
I don't know about the testimony of like the kids or anything, but just that light and the cop camera that caught the light as well, man, that looked.
There's been UFO crashes like all over the world, though.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like Russia had their own version of Roswell, and so did Israel. There's been two different cases of other technologies that have been advanced in different countries, and based on what UFO crashed.
What's their interest though in human? I just ask these questions, Brad. I don't expect you to, you don't have to entertain them. But I just like, what is their interest besides nuclear weapons? Like, why are they, all these high power countries, and there's Secretary of Defenses that are 80, 90 years old in Israel and in Canada that talk about contact with aliens on a regular basis between administrations. Like they don't care. They, no one should, it's never reported on, but that's, pretty, what are their concerns? Like, because you hear these stories where like what was the one where we were spliced from the Anunnaki and chimpanzees, and then we were to assemble water and gold. And then like every 6,800 years, I don't know if it's rings a bell or at all, but it's, every 6,800 years they come, and then the globe shifts because of the gravitational pull, and it all resets and starts over again.
And we never have a memory of it.
Yes.
Just some very ancient texts, like the Sumerian texts that talk about the Anunnaki and them being the genetic scientists that created humans, not just from chimpanzees, but also from proto-humans that once walked the earth, like Homo erectus, and given them a big upgrade. The inventor, the discoverer of DNA, goes by the name of Francis Crick. He actually said, after winning the Nobel Prize in science too, that the human DNA is so complex that for it to make that great leap from a Homo erectus or a Neanderthal man to a Homo sapien is like the entire parts of an entire 747 being strewn out in someone's front yard, like a garage sale. And being
creationism comes in, that must explain for a God, but
there you go. But maybe the creator was a genetic scientist. That's what Enki and his brother Allele were supposedly these genetic tinkerers, Anunnaki, who basically created the human race to be smart enough to take orders, but dumb enough not to question authority. And they needed these proto-Homo sapiens to work the gold mines of South Africa. And indeed, there are many prehistoric gold mines down there, as well as very old stone ruins. My colleague Michael Tellinger takes people on trips to see some of those stoneworks, including the oldest Stonehenge in the world called Adam's Calendar. And he also has another location with a giant footprint, which is now in rock form, but it happens to have 6 toes. And the footprint is about as small as an adolescent boy who's seen pictured next to it. So a lot of mysteries in South Africa, including also everybody, even evolutionists, would agree that humans came out of Africa. And so there are truths in some of these old fables, and in fact, great truths that we can derive some of our ancient history from.
Well, just the accounts of the floods, it's one thing if it's, just the Bible or Abrahamic religions that teach that. But I mean, it's 40 different places from completely different sides of the earth. And they all talk about a flood that happened, 10,000, 6,000 years ago.
Right.
That's too much of a coincidence to just pretend that it didn't happen. But then, are these people that, I forget what they're, the Ariani, and they figured out a way to survive these pole shifts or, whatever takes place at this time,
Well, the Ariani is a civilization that lives under the ice. So perhaps they, like other inner earth races, Agartha, Shambhala, even under the mountain Shasta, the Telos civilization, they're able to live down there. And it's interesting that most are in or near active volcanoes, because then you have the propensity for warmth, energy source, even melting water. And Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world. So you have geothermal features throughout the continent. So you have the propensity to create these very large under ice domes there. And that's what I think the domain was, one of these large under ice domes. And there's even flowing rivers and lakes down there that only now it's being found out. People are interested in this. They can look at the MISARD study, which is mapping out the flowing rivers and lakes in Antarctica. And I talk about it in my presentation and show these slides. Over 150 lakes, including one, the largest, Lake Vostok. It's about the size of Lake Ontario. It's one of the top 10 largest lakes in the world that nobody's ever heard of.
In Russia?
No, in Antarctica. It's
Really?
the Vostok Station. Yeah, you can see it right about there.
I'll Google it and throw it on here. What is it called? Lake Vostok?
Vostok.
There's some people that think that the whole Garden of Eden could be under the ice too.
Or Atlantis. Yeah, I'm looking into that too. I just say that the evidence is very scant for high civilization, although there is, including on Google Earth, you can get some pretty good images of what look like pyramids or city layouts. Unfortunately, they're kind of blurry, but the fact that they're there, because Mother Nature doesn't create right angles in perfect symmetrical form like the pyramids in Antarctica too, that it's certainly worth further investigation.
Absolutely. And see, I've always wondered too that, like, why Antarctica? Germany is located in Europe, which is a pretty fair distance away from Antarctica. So geographically, why was Germany so interested in Antarctica? But if there's an advanced civilization down there, then they would absolutely be interested in Antarctica and setting up a base down there. So this is very intriguing.
They'd be interested. They'd set up a base, but they wouldn't tell their constituents or the human race about it.
No,
this is
all considered a lot of resources being traveled down there during World War II. A lot of the resources were being focused on Antarctica.
That's right. Maybe even some nuclear testing or nuclear bombing the old German Neuschwabenland area, because shortly after Project Argus, and I do describe a lot of the things I'm talking about in my book, Beyond Esoteric, people want to know more about all this stuff, including the black goo, which is also found in an island just off Antarctica called Southern Thule Island. But they've been looking for what might be under the ice for a long time. And if they find something, they're not going to tell you about it. It's just the way it is. So we have to piece together with what little evidence we get, kind of like just the same way with UFOs or down craft. You just got to collect the little tidbits that made its way out there, because this stuff is still considered top secret.
So we talk about all of these, similarities in cultures when it comes to sightings and conversing with greater beings, and all the way back to Sumerian times.
Yeah.
What's the significance of all these cultures also talk about like a violent end to the earth? That's got to be taken into consideration too. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think you brought it up earlier about this Planet X, or Nibiru, as Zachariah Sitchin can call it, the 12th planet, that has a very oblong orbit around our sun. And when it comes if it comes near Earth on one of its inner Earth rotations, it'll trigger a pole shift scenario because of the extreme gravity. And that's what moves continents around. That's how Antarctica could also be the home of Atlantis, which drifted down on the West Palmer Peninsula. Western Antarctica is a very recent addition. The large polar plateau, the big pie-shaped, that's East Antarctica. That's a very old landmass. That goes all the way back to Gondwana and Pangaea, when all the continents were connected, because Antarctica had once been a very hot, steamy jungle. Like I'm in a hot, steamy room right now, because they found fossils there. They even found dinosaur species that are exclusive only to Antarctica, as well as
like large grazing mammals, weren't they? And mostly grazing, which would have meant there had been a large landmass for them to eat.
Right, like megafauna and megaflora, very large extinct animals and plants that once existed on Earth. But there's no way any of that could live there now, because it's so hot and steamy jungle.
Well, it's just, I find it interesting. There's certain, there's always this, like the Nords talk about, the end of the world. There's nothing you can do about it. And Christianity talks about similar beliefs when it comes to that. And then, you have this case, is there a reason why we're seeing so many sightings now, or this increase of sightings and this whistleblowing? What's with the vamp up activity going on?
Yeah, great question. I asked the same thing. Why now? They've had 75 years to do disclosure. Why is it always coming out now as a just one-off story, like the Lester Holt on NBC Nightly News? They didn't cover it the next day. They didn't cover it again. The other stations didn't even cover it. The biggest news story in the history of humanity, we're just going to cover it once and then let it go. So why now? Why is this getting it? Well, it's called predictive programming, and it's a way of putting these ideas into people's minds. And through predictive programming, you can get people conditioned to certain ideas. In this case, UFO visitations, aliens, perhaps an invasion, perhaps motherships coming to Earth with high technology, perhaps wanting to take the planet by storm. That's funny, because that's exactly what Project Bluebeam is.
Right, yeah.
A fake alien invasion. Maybe they're prepping us for that, which a CIA analyst whistleblower from 1989 said back then that Project Bluebeam would be in 2024. So it's in perfect lockstep synchronization of events to be announcing this stuff right now so people are prepared for it in 2024 with the fake alien invasion called Project Bluebeam.
Do they do this? I mean, I don't know if you even care to discuss some political aspects, but is this a ploy in order to maintain, their power in the White House? Because I feel like just through actions that the State Department running the White House right now with how they're treating foreign affairs.
Sure.
So, in order not to lose that, they, throw a project because. And the reason I say this is you could suspend an election if you could bring about such a thing.
Fake alien invasion would do the trick, wouldn't it?
Ronald Reagan said that in his,
he did.
One of his speeches. He said, wouldn't it be something that, or wouldn't we all come together if there was?
That's right. In front of the United Nations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of it's all interesting, especially because it first thing it reminds me of is like somebody like Bob Lazar, who came out in the 90s and nobody, he was in fear of his safety and nobody really paid attention to him and listened to him. But it wasn't until even recently where he regained popularity and people are really starting to listen to him because of like Element 115. He said something in the 90s about it. And nobody believed it, and then now we call it Moscovium, and it's a real thing now. It's on the periodic table like today. So to me, it's interesting that a lot of these things, we don't tend to believe them, but then all of a sudden when they more things are coming to light, and that could be why there's more of an increase, not just people having cameras like readily available on their cell phones. But more of these things are coming out and coming to light, and we're an imaginative generation that's we like movies, easy to manipulate, I guess, and manipulating.
You would need something to shock people to their senses, and that and an invasion by aliens would definitely. This is happening now.
And just remember, everything is problem, reaction, solution. The problem is we're getting invaded by aliens. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to react with all our high-tech military hardware, which Randy Kramer, who came out of the Super Soldier program, is an advocate for Project Bluebeam because he says the military needs a way to show the world what they got. Because they are literally hundreds of years in advance with this technology and the backward engineering they've been doing after they got all the German scientists over here during
Paperclip.
Yeah. So that would be the reaction. Okay, let's show them the hardware. Let's fight off these aliens, which Randy Kramer said are going to be the insectoids, the mantids. And they're of a hive mind. They can reproduce very rapidly. They volunteer for the mission because there will be collateral damage. There will be ships exploding in the sky and debris falling to the ground and maybe a big mantid arm falling in your backyard, shocking you and your neighbors. So it's going to appear very real. But the solution and what it will be all about, this is what even paperclip Nazi Werner von Braun told his research assistant, Carol Rosen, in his dying days. He had a change of heart because he knew about Project Bluebeam. And he said the last move they are going to make before world government, before this new world order takeover, is a fake alien invasion. Because then it would reset everything. Just like Karl Schwabenheimer, one of these mother weffers.
Yeah, very good pronunciations.
That they would never let a good crisis go to waste. This is more quotes from the globalists. That they engineer this stuff to get their reaction solution. The solution for them would be to reset all systems. That Anal Schwab said that we're going to use the reset from COVID to change everything. Well, you engineered COVID. So why should we believe you that this is going to be good for us in any way to have central bank digital currency that they could turn on and shut off at whim? Oh, we saw your interview on Phantom Facts, Mr. Olsen. We're cutting you off from your bank account.
Don't worry. That's the pleasure of doing an interview with us. No one's watching.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's where this is leading, right? So it will certainly stifle any dissent because you're going to have to go along with the program, because if you don't, you can't eat. That's how close we are to this ultimate form of neo-fascism, worse than anything that George Orwell could have ever imagined in 1984. Because now they have the aid of artificial intelligence and high technology, including robotry, which has already crossed the Rubicon and has started to kill humans. Because the first law of robotry, according to Isaac Asimov in his book I, Robot, is one must never hurt a human. A robot can never kill, but it's already done that. So we're already in the post I, Robot era, if you want to call it that. And
I was watching this
it's a dangerous new world. Say again?
I was watching this interview with Robert Kennedy Jr. And they asked him what he thought was one of the most dangerous things that the world needs to look out for. And he's like, AI technology. And I was just like, did not expect that for an answer. I was just like, that's because I haven't really paid much attention to any of this. You know, like I can't comprehend what they have fucked up. You know, like they're already messing with COVID and these labs in Ukraine and these labs in China that were being funded by us, and we were creating all these messed up diseases that were immune to stuff, and they got caught, sort of, not really punished for anything, but everyone knows,
right?
And that was largely to do with Jon Stewart when he was on the Colbert show, on the late night show. And he's like, it's pretty obvious. There's a Wuhan COVID clinic where they make Wuhan COVID, and outside it doesn't happen by accident.
Right.
And, and then you've got these, mosquitoes that are getting, what? I don't even know what they're doing to these mosquitoes. I just see how all of a sudden now it's good that we're releasing into the environment like 26,000 mosquitoes. Like, hey.
With mRNA. So everybody that didn't get it injected are going to get it through mosquito bites. Well, thanks, globalists. You guys sure are serving humanity. How else can you enslave and kill us off? But I think it goes beyond the globalists as in their human form. This is an anti-human depopulation agenda, which is now rearing its very ugly head. And what I mean by that is, when you look at, say, the chemtrailing operations, the geoengineering, which, by the way, is another chapter and beyond esoteric, everything I'm saying here, back it up with resources and links and ways that people can further their own research, which I always encourage people to do. Anything that you hear me say, please research it and find out for yourself. If you find I've made a mistake, please let me know, because I'm always updating everything I know. But we have to have a clear picture of what's going on here, because you can't understand the enemy. How can you even attempt to stay alive? So how is this an anti-human depopulation agenda? Because with the chemtrailing, that's not what the planet needs. That's not what humans need at all. It's very detrimental. It is changing the climate. That's the real climate crisis. How come you never hear little Greta talk about the chemtrail agenda, which is all over Europe? See it all the time. It's happening in all the Western nations. There are some countries where they do not chemtrail. I had a expat friend of mine who read my first book, World Stompers, which for the first 15 years, I was a travel writer writing travel books. There it is on my bookshelf. And World Stompers is, still in print and gives people an idea about how to travel around the world. So he did that, and he went to Cambodia, loved it, and decided to live there. We used to play volleyball on Baker Beach, and we'd see the chemtrails all day, and beautiful blue sky day, and it would end in a milky white haze. And it was absolutely 100% apparent that came out of an airplane. We saw it happen. We saw the clouds form. Then sometimes they'll hit it with the HARP arrays, and then it'll ripple in the same pattern as sand underneath the water. And that's when they're moving the storms around. This is how they're able to do it. They heat up the ionosphere using these HARP arrays and the chemtrails, and then create pressure zones where the storms move into the void.
20 years ago.
So my friend in Cambodia says he's never seen a single chemtrail there. They don't do it there. It's because some countries do and some don't.
20 years ago, you had been called crazy for saying chemtrails, all this stuff, and now it's open. It's very open. China brags about it. And
you'd be surprised how many people don't believe it, though. Yeah. China brags about it. A lot of countries talk about doing it. Mexico just came out a couple months ago and said, we don't want you spraying us anymore, USA. Stop doing it. Called an end to the geoengineering campaign.
Yeah, you're right. Because the chemtrail thing, that used to be a conspiracy theory at one point. And now it's out in the open. Like, so that,
not just out in the open and they're like, oh, we're sorry. They're like, yeah.
Check out what we're doing. Yeah.
Full throttle. Like, and everyone's all okay with it now. But before, they would have been, furious.
But that leads me to this thought. Like, okay, so with like Roswell and things, like, I believe 100% Roswell happened. And if we don't, I think we should just talk to Linda to show that it did. But I think that they may have, because I have a hard time believing that these advanced crafts just like fall out of the sky. Like, I think that they're a more calculated crash, like they meant to, more so. And
you think like they're on purpose trying to communicate with people outside of the government, or?
Yeah. So, like, what are your thoughts on calculated crashes? Like, are the people, like, or are these advanced civilizations, like, are they machines malfunctioning and then crashing, or are they just crashing on purpose?
Yeah.
Who knows? Like, I don't, there's so many questions. What's your new book coming out, Brad?
Well, it's going to take me about 2 years to do it, but it's called Esoteric Antarctica, kind of along the lines of my esoteric book series. This is book 3 in that series that we've been talking about tonight. But I've come into so much more information about Antarctica and Operation High Jump and the Nazi base down in New Schwabenland that and I'm writing a script for Forbidden Knowledge TV, where I will have a whole bunch of that I've written script for, and I'll have a whole bunch of material that I could parlay into the book. So probably 2025, let's say optimistically. I'm also a book publisher, so I have other authors such as Leo Lion-Zagami, 5 books, Confessions of an Illuminati, and others. Lon Milo Duquette, The Key to Solomon's Key, some other travel writers, and I also have new authors, including Michael Jaco, the Navy SEAL, and next year Laura Eisenhower is coming out with her first book, and we're going to do a 3-book.
Congratulations!
Yeah,
those are great names. Any events coming up that you'd like to promote before? I know we kept you for like an hour. But you're fascinating to talk to. Anything you'd like to promote? Just
Yeah, I was just speaking at 3 conferences within a month in May and June. Now I've got a bit of a lull, but I'm a lot of travel plans, going back to Chicago to see my family in a couple weeks. And then I'm flying to Florida to do the filming for Secrets of Antarctica, this 8-episode series I'm doing with Forbidden Knowledge, Billy Carson's company. Then I got, 2 events in September, speaking at the 5D Alien event, middle of September down in Las Vegas. Then very next weekend, shooting back up to Mount Shasta. And in October, I'm going out to the GSIC conference in Orlando, Florida. Galactic and Spiritual Informers Connection. But that's a big event, 600-700 people, really great hotel space right across the entrance from one of the parks there in Orlando. And
I'll have to book a company trip to that one.
Yeah, come on out. I'm giving my new talk about the maps of Antarctica many centuries before it was discovered, pretty accurately depicting the continent, and also the megalithic and polygonal architecture around the world, including underwater archaeology, making the case for an antediluvian or high-tech civilization on this planet, much older and longer than we've been led to believe.
Well, Brad, thanks so much again for coming on the show. Very welcome guest and putting up with us. We always appreciate it.
Oh, hey guys, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on again. And sometime.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brad. It's Brad Olsen, writer of the Esoteric series. He's fascinating, man. All right, thoughts? What did you learn today? What's your thoughts on?
Wow, like there's a lot. Just opening my mind to, like, you know, is there, it just made me wonder, is there something under all that ice? Like, you know, is everyone white? Right. Like, is it a wall? But, you know, where there's a wall, there's always something beyond that wall. So it's like, you know, wow, is the movie The Journey to the Center of the Earth an entertainment value or a documentary?
Everyone says they can't hear you. I hear you just fine though. Have to listen to it post edit, Lobo. Sorry. Go walk right into that microphone and see if that makes a difference.
Yeah, I don't know.
There you go.
There we go. Is that better?
All right, well, we'll find out in a
But
second.
it makes me wonder if there is some truth behind the journey to the center of the earth. Like, is there a Tyrannosaurus Rex living inside the earth?
Well, all of these, now even the alien thing is just like become doom and gloom. Like, hey, when aliens show up, the earth is going to shift poles and everyone's going to die except for like 3 people.
Well, why is everybody saying that there are enemies though? Like, that's what I like, because I don't know. Like, that's what I'm confused by. Is are they enemies? Because if they are, like, how do the Nazis like get along with them so well?
Exactly. Right. That's what I was really, and no one answers that part. Were they the good Nazis? Hey, we just found the science. We don't care about the human. We don't. It's
you munch on humans. I don't care. I'm here for technology.
But why did they send Germans to, or let's say it's just aliens and they're like, hey, let's what would they identify as? What would they be most likely to listen to that would come up on each side of their wing? Like, I know. We'll put a Nazi symbol on it.
We call it Umbaka.
Umbaka. Fucker.
Like, that's what I don't know. Like, I knew there was a hole in there, but in Antarctica, like in a plateau. But it's interesting that, like, there's a road that goes down in there. Like, that to me is.
And well, here's what I think. I think more and more that there is just no hope. That is what I believe. There is no more hope left in the world. There is no chance of survival.
Well, check this out.
We all die, except the very rich that somehow become a master race hidden in the sand and are friends with Nazis. That's your options. Or little gray people that are like,
well, create a huge invasion that's going to force everyone to come together, like Ronald Reagan said, right? And now you have ingredients for like a one world government.
Right.
Just like, to me, it's like just like what Revelation talks about. You're gonna have someone, you're gonna have a savior that comes in like, oh, I can protect you. You know, we can be the mediator between everyone. We can make sure everyone's safe, because now we have a new problem. That, and what are we going to look for? We're going to look for a solution. Well, you know, now this guy comes along and is like, hey, I have a solution, and to me, it's like, it's the old trick in the book. You create a problem, and you already know you're the solution to the problem. So to me, it's like, man, it's like a recipe of us falling in. Like, we're being told what's going to happen, and we're just falling right into it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's Naomi hasn't looked much into chemtrails.
They're like, they're giant.
Do we have a red flag jingle? I should have a red flag jingle. I see something. Red flag.
Chemtrails, the giant, strange, cloud-looking things that look like an exhaust from an airplane, but you don't really see exhaust from the airplanes. And it's like, why do some of them? And the exhaust tends to stick around for a long time.
Well,
it dissipates like wind.
We got to go back to because now it's called cloud seeding.
Oh yeah,
it's not chemtrails. Yeah, chemtrails is the conspiracy theorist that started in the early 90s. You can see videos of Prince. Prince talks about it. Other people talk about it. But now that they are coming out and saying, hey, guess what, guys? We can actually create rain. Which, you can't tell me that's not like an accidental byproduct of what they were actually trying to do.
You want to create a rainy day for your enemy?
We're going here. We'll just.
The UAE is one of the driest countries on Earth, with an annual rainfall of roughly 120 millimeters. As a result, it has to get creative when it comes to finding solutions for water. In the early 2000s, the UAE started performing regular cloud seeding operations. Cloud seeding is the process of increasing the amount of rain produced from clouds.
Some of these clouds, by nature, sometimes it rains, for example, only 40 to 50% of its rain that processed in the cloud that comes as rainfall. So by these operations, we try to increase this amount by, for example, from 15 to 30%.
So how does it work? It starts here, inside the National Center of Meteorology, where a team is constantly monitoring forecasts, looking for potential clouds to seed. The operations only work with cumulus clouds, which are vertical in shape.
Research 5 operation. Can you read me?
Once they spot a cloud, they radio the pilots, who then take to the air armed with hydroscopic flares filled with a mixture of potassium chloride, sodium chloride, magnesium, and other materials.
Like aluminum.
It's essentially salt. When the plane reaches the right clouds, the pilots release the flares.
These salts basically attracts the moisture.
You gotta get paid
and
great money, right? You gotta get paid.
I guess their thought behind it, like, I don't know if it's a lot of money. I don't think it's like a too terrible amount. I mean, I guess the pilots are just thinking like, well, we're up here anyway. We might as well get double paid.
Not a bad deal. So now 25 years ago, this was talked about, but they were talking about how they were using it to, like, poison the water systems and all that stuff. But then, because I don't know if you saw that one interview with RFK on Rogan. I'm on an RFK roll right now, so you're just gonna have to bear with me. But that one RFK thing where he's talking about how he made his living in the beginning because they were testing the mercury in tuna from the ocean and comparing it to fish they were catching in this river in northern Ohio, or I can't remember where. And it was higher in the river. And then they started doing all these sorts of tests along the rivers, and it was high in mercury. And what they found out is that some of these plants that were doing coal and stuff, I can't remember what they all were, but he was the lawyer that prosecuted him, put the lawsuit up against them. But they were producing a byproduct of mercury that was vaporizing and then landing in the rivers. And it was there was high contents. He gave the number of what it was at. You know, they did years of study because, of course, as a coal company, you would fight that because that's, you know, so there's, you know, and he won those arguments. And so, like, it makes you wonder, like, now that they're, you know, like, oh no, there's a good reason for it. You know, that way it'll, you know, crops will grow. You know, we're doing it for you.
See, I can't help but think, you know, somebody's going to have to use it, or, well, I don't want to say have to, but they'll end up using it in a negative way, or in a way that, like, you know, hey, if you put a little bit or a teaspoon of this, it's going to make it rain. Well, what happens if I just, like, throw a bucket on?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, what'll 5 gallons be?
I mean, I guess it's not really any different than, you know, the rain stick Indians use. You know, that's you know, pretty much the same thing, right? So it's a way of population control. It's, yeah, they say the entire population of the planet can fit in, like, inside of Texas and Arkansas, with like an acre of land. Each of, like, everyone gets an acre.
Sounds
Horrible. That's horrible. Can you imagine?
probably no roads either, because it's going to
Just walk.
Road's not going to be on my side, right?
Yeah. Maybe you'd span out a little bit into New Mexico.
You have to. I mean, because you know somebody's going to be like, wait a minute, like, roads aren't anyone's property, right? Like, I still want my acre.
Did you hear about that going on? And listen, we got to talk about that Sunday. We got a show coming up Sunday. Kudos to the Eiffel Tower behind me, done by Christian. This is, painstakingly took him 89 hours. His knuckles bled and his fingertips have not recovered feeling. And so, and just for the show. He did that just for the show.
Like, that's impressive.
I heard it was millions. It was like times 38. Like, you had to be 38 to attempt it.
Absolute Lego master.
Lego legend. That way you get the double L.
The double Lego.
Lego legend. Could you do a triple L there somehow? Lego Legend League. Huh? 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 Copyright that.
Very nice.
Very nice. Okay, we got to stop this. All right, everyone, thanks for coming on, Anti-Heiser. Great show. Absolutely loved it, and look forward to seeing you on the next show Sunday, which we have a very special music show. It's a music episode. It's one of our we do, like, I don't you haven't experienced this, but like every 3 months or so we try to get a song in. So we're gonna go classic. It's been stuck in my head all day today because I've been doing research on it. That's how I feel it. I'm feeling it.
I like it.
Do you know who John Brown is? Ah!
I feel like I should.
Yeah, you'd be surprised that you know. John Brown. Yeah, so
I would.
yeah, gonna be a good episode.
Sunday.
All right. Thank you. Everyone, have a good rest of your week.
Yes.